What if I told you that the most dangerous weapon ever used against China was not a bomb, not a gun, but a drug? A drug so powerful that it destroyed an entire civilization from the inside without firing a single bullet. Imagine waking up in a country that once ruled the world, only to realize that foreign powers now decide what happens in your ports, your cities, even your laws. This is not fiction. This is China's real history. And unless you understand this story, you cannot understand why China behaves the way it does today. This video is about China's Century of Humiliation, a period from 1839 to 1949, when China was invaded, poisoned, carved up and publicly humiliated, and how surviving this trauma turned China into the aggressive, ambitious, and deeply suspicious global power we see today. In the early 1800s, China was not weak, it was not backward, it was not poor. Under the Qing Dynasty, China was the largest empire on earth by population and one of the richest economies in the world. Chinese inventions had shaped human history. Paper changed education. Gunpowder changed warfare. The compass changed navigation. Printing changed knowledge itself. European kings and elites were obsessed with Chinese goods. Tea was not just a drink in Britain, it was an addiction. Porcelain and silk were symbols of status and power. The Chinese emperor lived in the Forbidden City, surrounded by wealth so vast that European palaces looked modest in comparison. China believed it was the center of civilization, and for centuries it had been right. But here was China's fatal mistake. Confidence turned into arrogance. While Europe was transforming itself through the Industrial Revolution, China refused to adapt. Britain was building factories, railways, steamships, and modern armies. France and Germany were modernizing their economies and militaries. Science, engineering, and industrial production were reshaping power itself. China, however, believed it had nothing to learn. The Qing court viewed foreign nations as inferior barbarians. Foreigners were allowed to trade only under strict conditions, in limited ports, and always on China's terms. This attitude blinded China to a world that was changing faster than it ever had before. Britain faced a serious economic problem. It imported massive amounts of Chinese tea every year, but China refused to buy British products. China wanted silver, and only silver. British silver reserves were draining fast. Instead of fixing this imbalance fairly, Britain chose one of the most immoral strategies in modern history. It began smuggling opium into China. This was not an accident. This was not individual criminals. This was state-supported drug trafficking. Opium was grown in British-controlled India and shipped illegally into China by British merchants. The goal was simple: make the Chinese population addicted, drain China's silver, and reverse the trade imbalance. The impact was catastrophic. Opium addiction spread from elites to soldiers, farmers, and workers. Productivity collapsed. Families were destroyed. The Chinese military weakened. Silver flowed out of China into British hands. This was not just a drug crisis. It was economic warfare designed to collapse a civilization from within. The Qing government could no longer ignore it. In 1839, official Lin Zexu was sent to Canton to stop the opium trade. Lin arrested dealers, seized more than 1,000 tons of opium, and destroyed it publicly. He even wrote to Queen Victoria, asking how Britain would react if another country poisoned its people for profit. Britain did not reply. Britain sent warships. The First Opium War exposed the brutal reality of modern power. China had more soldiers, but Britain had steam-powered warships, modern cannons and rifles. Chinese troops still relied on swords, spears, and outdated firearms. British ships sailed up Chinese rivers, bombarding cities with ease. Traditional Chinese tactics were useless against industrial warfare. The war was short and humiliating. In 1842, China was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking. This treaty forced China to pay massive compensation, open key ports to British trade, grant legal immunity to British citizens, and permanently hand over Hong Kong. This was not a negotiation. It was a humiliation. And it signaled to the world that China was weak. Once China was cracked open, everyone rushed in. France, Russia, Germany, and later Japan all demanded privileges. The Second Opium War ended with foreign troops marching into Beijing and burning the old Summer Palace, one of the greatest cultural treasures in human history. Priceless art, books, and artifacts were looted and destroyed. This was not just military defeat, it was cultural annihilation. China's confidence was shattered. The message was clear. China was no longer sovereign. After the Opium Wars, China was not fully colonized like India or Africa, but it suffered something equally damaging. It was carved into spheres of influence. Foreign powers controlled Chinese ports, railways, mines, and industries. Foreign citizens did not follow Chinese law. They were tried in their own courts. Chinese people became second-class citizens in their own country. In some foreign-controlled areas, signs openly banned Chinese people. The Qing government still existed, but real power did not. China was alive, but it was not free. The Qing rulers attempted reforms through the self-strengthening movement, importing Western weapons, building shipyards, and sending students abroad. But corruption was everywhere. Conservative elites resisted change. Resources were wasted. Reforms came too late and too weak. The system was already rotten. Public anger exploded in 1900 with the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxers believed foreign influence was destroying China and that spiritual power could protect them from bullets. The Qing government, desperate and confused, supported them. This decision sealed their fate. 8 foreign nations formed an alliance and invaded China again. Beijing was occupied. The Boxers were crushed. China was forced to pay enormous reparations, more than its annual government revenue. This defeat destroyed whatever legitimacy the Qing Dynasty had left. In 1911, the dynasty collapsed. China became a republic, but freedom did not bring stability. The country fragmented. Warlords controlled regions. Civil war erupted. Millions lived in poverty and hunger. China, once a global civilization, had become a failed state. Then came the worst trauma of all. Japan, having rapidly modernized, invaded China in the 1930s. In 1937, Japanese forces captured Nanjing. What followed was one of the most horrific massacres in human history. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were murdered. Women were raped. Children were killed. Prisoners were used for brutal experiments. This was not just violence. It was an attempt to crush a nation's spirit. For 8 years, China fought Japan in a war that killed millions and destroyed cities and villages across the country. But something changed during this suffering. For the first time in decades, Chinese people began to unite. Nationalists and communists temporarily stopped fighting each other to resist the invaders. Shared pain created shared identity. The Century of Humiliation was no longer just history, it was lived experience. When Japan was defeated in 1945, China was devastated but determined. The Civil War resumed, and in 1949 the Communist Party under Mao Zedong took power. Mao declared that the Chinese people had finally stood up. China under Mao was united but poor. Radical policies caused famine and suffering, but one thing was clear. China would never allow itself to be humiliated again. The Communist Party turned the Century of Humiliation into the foundation of national identity. It was taught in schools, preserved in museums, repeated in speeches. The message was drilled into every generation. Weakness invites invasion. Division invites humiliation. Only strength ensures survival. After Mao's death, Deng Xiaoping transformed China's strategy. Ideology was replaced with pragmatism. China opened its economy to foreign investment while keeping strict political control. The results were historic. Hundreds of millions were lifted out of poverty. China became the world's factory. Cities transformed into megacities. Infrastructure expanded at a scale never seen before. China returned to global power faster than any nation in history. But this rise is driven by memory as much as ambition. China's military expansion, economic dominance, and aggressive foreign policy are shaped by fear of repeating history. Taiwan represents unfinished humiliation. The South China Sea represents control over waters once dominated by foreign navies. Resistance to Western criticism is rooted in the belief that the West never truly respected China. The Communist Party's legitimacy depends on preventing another humiliation. China was once a victim, but today it is a superpower. The final question is this: can a nation shaped by trauma become a peaceful global leader? Or will the memory of humiliation push it toward confrontation? History explains China's past, but it also warns us about its future. If this story made you see China differently, then the next video will take you even deeper into the forces shaping our world.